Good afternoon and welcome to the Art Museum of West Virginia University's Lunchtime Look series. I'm going to give everyone a few moments to log on before I introduce our speaker and we get started. So I'm watching the participant count click up, and once I see us kind of stabilize a little bit, then I will introduce our speaker and we'll get started. So I'll give us all a few minutes. Okay, and kind of slow down. I think that first rush of people coming in is over, and in the interest of keeping to our schedule and time, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Heather Harris, and I am the Educational Programs Manager at the Art Museum of West Virginia University. We are very happy to have you here to have our last lunchtime looks of 2020 of the academic semester, and the last one focusing on our exhibition, Personal to Political, celebrating the African American artists of Paulson Fontaine Press. So this exhibition is actually only open for 2 more weekends. So we encourage you, if you are able, to go on our website and book tickets to come see it either this weekend or next before it travels on. And we've had a really wonderful time getting to engage with some of the artists and the printmaker, Pam Paulson, who are involved in this show. And we've been really lucky and privileged to have it and to engage in some of the conversations that it stimulates. And we're going to continue that conversation here today. But before we do, just a few technical notes. We will be taking questions in the Q&A. So Q&A rather than chat. Chat we're going to use kind of behind the scenes for any technical issues, but Q&A is for any questions, and we will have time for questions after Ms. Thomas is done. So please feel free to put that in the Q&A, and I will make sure that we get to them. And we also have a closed captioner doing live captioning for us today. So if you wish to avail yourself of that, you can hit the closed caption button on the bottom of your screen and use that resource. And without further ado, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So my speaker today is Lava Thomas, who is an artist who engages in multidisciplinary practice, ranging from painting to sculpture to site-specific work, and in the case of some of the pieces in this exhibition, printmaking as well. And she is a well-known and recognized and celebrated artist based out of the Bay Area in California. Her works of art are in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Studio Museum of Harlem. And so we're really privileged to have her work on display at our museum currently, and to have her here today to talk about talk a little about her practice. So thank you, Lava.
Thank you, Heather, and the University of West Virginia community for inviting me to speak about my work. And thank all of you in the virtual audience. Whether creating memorials to victims of racial violence or highlighting the courage and leadership of women in the struggle for civil rights, I'm ultimately concerned with ideas that amplify resilience, empowerment, and healing in the face of erasure, trauma, and oppression. So today I'm going to share with you some of the projects that I've completed over the past 5 years. Requiem for Charleston. Requiem for Charleston is a wall composition of Black tambourines that memorialize the women and men who were murdered by a white supremacist at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina on June 17, 2015. Tambourines aren't usually a part of AME worship, but in the aftermath of the tragedy, the instrument began to emerge as a symbol of unity and healing. On the Sunday after the shooting, crowds of people took to the streets in support of Mother Emanuel Church, some ringing handbells, some playing tambourines. 9 of the tambourines are inscribed with the names of the victims in pyrographic calligraphy, using a wood-burning tool typically used in Americana crafts. I wanted to symbolically burn the names of the dead into our collective memory and also recall a time when the enslaved were branded. I covered most of the tambourines with black lambskin. The lamb is associated with innocence and sacrifice in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim traditions. Some of the tambourines are left blank for the countless attacks on Black churches throughout American history. The tambourines are encircled with an ornamental ribbon that's often used on choir robes. Other tambourines were covered with discs of black acrylic so that the viewer can see their reflection and become part of the work, a gesture to encourage empathy. The tambourines are installed in a square on its side so that the axis forms a cross. As a girl growing up in the Black church, playing the tambourine for me was a kind of ecstasy. But here, the tambourines bound in red pay silent tribute to the women and men who were slain. 2 years ago, I met some of the relatives of the victims, Reverend Sharon Risher and her daughter Asia. Risher lost her mother, 2 cousins, and a childhood friend in the Charleston massacre, and has since become an outspoken advocate for gun control. I invited her and her daughter to attend a talk at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which commemorated the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. The Smithsonian arranged for them to have a private viewing of the work, and it was humbling to know that the work had found the audience for whom it was intended, and that it could in some way contribute to the healing process for them. Looking back and seeing now. I was working on this exhibition when the Charleston tragedy occurred, and the grief and rage, both personal and collective, was overwhelming. I responded by transforming the gallery into a contemplative space that evoked the prayers, resilience, and strength of my foremothers, Black women from the South. Looking back and seeing now combined the material and the spiritual in a site-specific immersive tambourine installation, which incorporated large-scale portraiture based on photographs from my family archive. The garden setting of the Berkeley Art Center and the building's octagonal architecture were perfectly suited to provide respite and refuge. The studio shot on the left gives you a sense of the portrait scale. The portraits are 6 feet square. And the shot on the right shows you what the portrait looks like when you're looking at it from across the gallery. The portraits of my ancestors are from the early 1900s, drawn from photographs that I found in my grandmother's photo album. The stories told to me by my grandmother of Ku Klux Klan cross burnings in her hometown of Decatur, Texas, left me to imagine what these women must have witnessed. I activated the portrait's gaze by painting the eyes in color as a means to bring the portraits into the present. I enlarged the eyes from the portraits and placed them on the tambourines. The installation created a space where the past and present met. Theatrical lights and mirrored tambourines cast moving reflections and shadows onto the gallery walls, activating the space into an immersive experience in which the viewer became a part. Viewers saw themselves reflected in the piece, and the piece in turn seemed to return their gaze. Mugshot portraits, women of the Montgomery bus boycott. This project takes a contemporary look back at a powerful yet under-acknowledged legacy of Black women's activism through a series of portraits based on mugshots of women who were arrested during a foundational event of the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 and 56. The women were part of a group of boycott leaders who were arrested for breaking Alabama's anti-boycott laws. I chose this period of American history as a site of inquiry for its relevance to the present. The resurgence of racial hostility, misogyny, and lethal violence, and the ascent of white male supremacy in the executive branch, and the methodical erosion of hard-won civil rights laws and protections. The popular narrative of the Montgomery bus boycott is well known. Rosa Parks' arrest for giving up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated Montgomery bus. The ensuing year-long boycott led by Martin Luther King Jr. and the NAACP lawsuit, which resulted in the Supreme Court ruling that deemed segregation on Montgomery buses unconstitutional. That narrative centers men as the principal players, as seen in this photograph by Don Cravers for Time Life Pictures. This project aims to expand that narrative and addresses the near absence of Black women in what remains a male-centric historiography of the era. I'm looking at this period through firsthand accounts of women who organized and participated in the boycott, as well as texts on gender in the civil rights movement, Black feminism, and histories of women's activism. So this project reconsiders that history. Rosa Parks was not simply a seamstress too tired to give up her seat to a white passenger. Parks was a longtime civil rights activist, secretary, and investigator for the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. Joanne Robinson initiated the boycott. An English professor at Alabama State College and president of the Women's Political Council, Robinson and the WPC planned and organized a one-day boycott, arranging for the distribution of over 50,000 handbills, urging Black Montgomery residents not to ride the bus. Ministers of Montgomery's Black churches embraced the action, extending the boycott and electing Martin Luther King Jr. as president of the newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association. But Black women were the chief strategists, fundraisers, carpool organizers, and drivers, along with the thousands of domestic workers who refused to ride the bus, financially crippling the bus company, as well as crippling businesses in downtown Montgomery, who reportedly lost millions of dollars of revenue. And the backlash was swift. 2 months into the boycott, an Alabama grand jury handed down over 80 indictments. When boycott leaders learned that mass arrests were imminent, they turned themselves in, riding together in groups to support one another rather than suffer the humiliation of being arrested at their homes or places of employment. They seized the moment of surrender and made it their own, choosing when and how they would be photographed as part of the criminal record. Dressing well was an act of self-regard, a way to maintain what historian Danielle McGuire calls bodily integrity. Acting within the repressive limits of the mugshot, a photograph designed to remove traces of the sitter's humanity, the women took control of their representation with their self-possession, their style, even their refusal to hang the booking numbers around their necks. They actively contributed to the making of their image, speaking to the idea that a photograph is not taken, it's made. Transforming codes of criminality into representations of resistance, the portraits honor the women's service and sacrifice. And the range of emotions in the women's faces is striking. Ida Mae Caldwell's expression conveys a look of resignation as her eyes avert the camera, while the side eye and smirk of a Uretta Affadare conveys a kind of quiet defiance. I chose to draw the portraits instead of creating paintings because the act of drawing is accessible. We have all used a pencil and engaged in some form of mark making. Conceptually, the notion of labor is embedded in each drawing with the accumulation of thousands of strokes. The drawings are built in layers in a process that is laborious and time-consuming. The materiality of the portraits is a metaphor for the fragility of this history, the ease with which it can be erased if it isn't preserved. As drawings, the portraits have to be protected and treated with care, framed and kept out of direct sunlight to prevent fading and yellowing. With the exception of Parks and a few others, we know little more than the names of these women. The portraits are drawn slightly larger than life size and hung at eye level so that the viewer has an intimate one-to-one engagement with them. This series represents only a fraction of the thousands of Black women who were the backbone and also at the forefront of the movement. And here's an installation shot of the portraits. They were exhibited at Rena Branston Gallery in San Francisco. and where they were exhibited at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles. This past May, during a conversation with Nikki Giovanni, Angela Davis spoke about how the activism of Black women of the Montgomery bus boycott continues to inspire current activism. And I quote, "People assumed that the Montgomery bus boycott was a product of the imagination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, Dr. King emerged as a public figure during the Montgomery bus boycott. But it was Black women who organized that boycott, who participated in that boycott. And it was not only Black women, it was poor Black women. It was Black women who were domestic workers, who were maids, who were cooks, who were washerwomen. And those are the women I would like to lift up now. I would like us to be able to imagine how it is that we are here today as a direct consequence of the collective imagination of poor Black women who walked." Civil Rights Unfinished. This piece is entitled "The Civil Rights Act of 1960, Unfinished. Its dimensions are proportional to the dimensions of the American flag." The beginning text of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 is written in pyrographic calligraphy on Black lambskin. This work also engages the history of modernist painting, Ad Reinhardt's Black paintings, as well as the flag paintings of Jasper Johns. The Civil Rights Act of 1960 was established to rectify discriminatory laws and practices in the segregated South, which prevented African Americans from voting. It was enacted under President Eisenhower and was meant to eliminate loopholes left by the Civil Rights Act of 1957. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, or national origin. It prohibits unequal protection, unequal application of voter registration requirements, racial segregation in schools, employment, and public accommodations. This law was passed under the Johnson administration. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law by President Johnson to overcome legal barriers at the state and local level that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote. The 2013 Shelby County versus Holder Supreme Court case reversed some of the voting protections granted by these laws. This body of work reminds us that 60 years later, even after reaching these legislative landmarks, our country's task to secure basic voting rights remains unfinished. The attempts to restrict mail-in voting and attacks on the United States Post Office prior to the November 3rd election, and the post-election attempts to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of voters in predominantly Black voting districts in Detroit, Michigan, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by the Trump administration is yet another example. Freedom songs. This project recalls civil rights era protest songs in the African American tradition, from spirituals, gospel, and rhythm and blues. Freedom songs were sung to inspire courage during meetings, marches, and when activists were arrested and jailed. "A Change is Going to Come, Oh Yes It Will" takes its title from the song by Sam Cooke, written in 1964. And this piece is currently included in the Personal to Political exhibition. Illuminated Anthem is inscribed with the lyrics of the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing," originally written as a poem by James Weldon Johnson in 1900. It was declared the Negro National Anthem by the NAACP in 1919 and was also an important anthem of the Civil Rights Movement. The song is a powerful declaration of determination and hope in the face of adversity and oppression. The lyrics transcend racial boundaries. It's an aspirational song for all oppressed people in the struggle for freedom and equality. And here's a detail shot with the lyrics written in pyrographic calligraphy on metallic leather. Freedom Song number 5, "We Shall Not Be Moved," engages the intimate and civil act of bearing witness. This piece also includes drawing of my Southern ancestors' eyes. Resistance Reverb, Movements 1 and 2. Resistance Reverb, Movements 1 and 2 is an immersive tambourine installation that speaks to the topic of solidarity. The installation utilizes the tambourine as an instrument of protest and takes its visual cues from the 2017 Women's March, the pink wave of women's political agency with an unprecedented number of women who won congressional seats in the 2018 midterm elections, and also the use of pink and feminist art from the 1970s and 80s. The tambourine is an egalitarian instrument that speaks to our common humanity. Anyone can play it without special training, and its history is rooted in cultures around the globe. And this installation is comprised of over 700 altered tambourines. Written on the drums of some of the tambourines are fragments of political speeches by women throughout US history. Mariah Stewart, the first African-American woman political writer, Sojourner Truth, abolitionist and women's rights activist, labor leader Dolores Huerta, Japanese-American civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama, and Alicia Garza, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and others. And here's a detail of the work in progress. Drawing from over 100 years of speeches by activist women, this work links historic and contemporary movements for gender and racial equality. The mirrored wall composition includes the viewer in the continuum of activism, encouraging viewers to consider their role in an ongoing legacy of resistance. For the exhibition's opening, I invited Thrive Choir, an Oakland-based social justice choir, to activate the space by leading a community sing in freedom songs and contemporary protest songs. The exhibition also included a reading kiosk with books by activists, scholars, and feminists. Invoking a vision that is forward-thinking and inclusive, the crowd of tambourines represents a multiplicity united in solidarity, yet still retaining individual agency, power placed directly in the hands of the people. Pandemic portraits. During the shelter in place, I began a series of pandemic portraits, a commentary on masks as both a public health necessity and a polarizing political flashpoint. The portrait is also a reminder that women of color, and Black and Brown women in particular, are on the front lines as essential workers, facing disproportionate risk and death. And this is the first portrait that is part of a larger project and process. Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman, a proposal for a sculpture to honor Dr. Maya Angelou for the San Francisco Library. In January of 2019, I was invited to apply to a competition for a public art project to honor Dr. Maya Angelou for the San Francisco Library. Currently in San Francisco, there are 87 sculptures dedicated to men and only 2 to women. The city of San Francisco is attempting to redress this gender disparity through legislation to increase the representation of women in the public realm to 30%. The sculpture to honor Dr. Angelou is the inaugural commission, and this is a national endeavor with monuments being erected to women across the country. A bit of background. The legislation introduced in 2017 didn't pass until the following year because the Arts Commission, who oversees public artworks in the city, didn't want to be prescriptive in calling for a statue and wanted to give artists more creative freedom. The competition was publicized heavily in the press, calling for, and I quote, a contemporary presentation of a sculpture honoring Maya Angelou, which is what you would expect from a city with a reputation for being progressive. So the original legislation was updated to specify an artwork, not a statue. My proposal, Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman, ultimately won the competition and was selected by a panel of artists and arts professionals in a transparent and democratic process. 2 months later, however, it was rejected by San Francisco city officials. But last month, over a year, when it was finally approved by the San Francisco Arts Commission. So I'm going to share images from my presentation to the selection panel and discuss the aftermath of the city's rejection of my proposal and the events that led to the San Francisco Arts Commission to finally approve my monument design. Over the course of this past year, my work and voice have been at the center of conversations on censorship, representation, government overreach, and racial and cultural equity in public art, raising important questions about the integrity of selection processes and who dictates the representation of Black women in the public realm. These issues continue to reverberate as this country grapples with its problematic history of monuments to white supremacy and the aesthetics of conquest and domination on the public landscape. Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman introduces a new icon to the city of San Francisco with a representation of Dr. Angelou that doesn't already exist in the public's consciousness, a monument that would allow her to be seen and experienced in a fresh and contemporary way, a monument that embodies her courage, her beauty and strength, and fierce self-possession, a monument whose formal and conceptual choices are driven by Dr. Angelou's own words, how she defined herself, her values, and the overarching philosophy of her life and work. The monument's title, Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman, is from Dr. Angelou's poem, Phenomenal Woman. Proclaiming herself as phenomenal in a society that persistently attempts to dehumanize Black and Brown people required and requires still unassailable courage. Courage is the most important of all virtues, according to Dr. Angelou, the foundation upon which all other virtues stand. The base of the monument reads, and I quote, "If one has courage, nothing can dim the light that shines from within." My process began with research, immersing myself in Dr. Angelou's works, interviews, performances, and reading works by other Black women writers, scholars, and artists to provide a broader context in which to think about her life and work. Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman takes the form of a book fabricated in bronze and stands at a total height of 9 feet. A portrait of Dr. Angelou, translated from original drawing in bas-relief, appears on the book's cover with her name in bold letters on its spine. The monument's book form serves as a symbolic repository of her life and works, conceptually and physically tying the monument to its site in front of the library. Its scale emphasizes the vital importance of the library and reading throughout the course of Dr. Angelou's life. Her portrait is based on stills from the author's 1973 interview with Bill Moyers, which was conducted when she lived in Berkeley, California. By then, Dr. Angelou had received international recognition as an author, poet, film director, activist, and humanitarian. A true cosmopolitan, she spoke several languages, lived in several countries in Africa and Europe, traveled extensively, and performed on stages around the world. When Bill Moyers asked what price she paid for her freedom, the freedom to work, travel, and live so expansively, she answered, "The price is high, the reward is great. At some point you realize that you are only free that when you belong no place, but you belong every place." When Bill Moyers asked if she belonged to anyone, she answered, "I belong to myself." In this portrait, wearing a short afro and hoop earrings, Maya Angelou epitomizes the Black is beautiful aesthetic. This is a generative portrait that captures her human interiority and complexity with a nuanced expression that can be interpreted differently by each person that encounters it. The portrait not only transcends the decade from which it is based, it projects a timeless presence into the future. The quote on the back of the monument, in letters large enough to cover its surface, illustrates how reading and information cultivates empathy and understanding, necessary qualities to counter ignorance and intolerance. The human drama that unfolds in literature helps us to see our common humanity with greater clarity. Angelou's insistence that we are more alike than unalike is an underlying philosophy of her life and works. I write about the Black experience, she says, but I am always talking about the human condition. Bronze has long been the material of choice for commemorative monuments for its association with conquest, grandeur, and permanence. My choice of bronze, however, was inspired by the Benin bronze plaques of West Africa created by the Edo peoples, whose indigenous metallurgy technologies date back to the 13th century. I was also inspired by Elizabeth Catlett's memorial to Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man, a bronze monolith which stands in Harlem. Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman embraces the rectangularity of these works and situates itself in Black art, not a European figurative tradition of statuary. After the selection panel deliberated on August 9, 2019, I was informed that my proposal received near unanimous top ranking, and it would be approved at the next Visual Arts Committee meeting as a matter of course. Instead, 2 weeks later, I received a call informing me that the project sponsors preferred a more figurative work and that my proposal wouldn't be approved. So I did what any self-respecting artist would do. I wrote a scathing letter, which would be the first of many that I would write over the course of the year. And via social media, I rallied folks to attend the next Visual Arts Committee meeting to protect the integrity of the selection process, to seek answers, and to make public comments. During that meeting, Supervisor Stephanie stepped forward as the legislative sponsor of the project and rejected the selection panel's choice. She then ordered the Visual Arts Committee to shut down the project and start over, insisting that Dr. Angelou be honored with a traditional statue, even though the legislation's text had been edited to cross the word statue out. Stephanie said, as I carried the legislation across the finish line to elevate women in monuments, I wanted to do it in the same way that men have historically been elevated in the city. Her assertions weaponized European aesthetics and conventions of statuary to perpetuate the systemic and persistent erasure of Black women's intellectual and creative labor. This was the first time in San Francisco's history that a critical mass of Black women artists and arts professionals were invited to serve on a panel tasked with selecting an artist to honor an exceptional Black woman with a public sculpture. I spoke out condemning the decision, along with several members of the Bay Area Arts community who attended the meeting, including members of the selection panel. Taking to social media again, I urged the Bay Area Arts community to write Mayor Breed and Catherine Stephanie in protest. The story was covered by local and international press, which sparked community-wide outrage. And in the first of many public talks to raise awareness about the fiasco, I participated in a panel at Ashara Ekandayo Gallery that included many community members. Community activism grew out of that November meeting, along with the creation of See Black Women Collective, spearheaded by Tahira Rashid, Angela Hennessy, who was on the selection panel, Dana King, and Jamani Montague. I've since spoken out about this incident at venues around the country now, Art Practice in Los Angeles, the National Portrait Gallery, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Archive, among others. The Arts Commission, meanwhile, issued a new RFQ for the Maya Angelou Monument in January 2020. Artists boycotted that RFQ or asked permission to use my images in their submittals. But in the wake of Black Lives Matter uprisings this past summer, with monuments to white supremacy being toppled and removed, not only in San Francisco, but around the country and the world, monuments were back in the public consciousness. After San Francisco's removal of the Christopher Columbus Monument and protesters toppling monuments to Francis Scott Key and Junipero Serra and Golden Gate Park, Mayor Breed called for an audit of San Francisco's monuments to determine which should stay and which should be removed. I challenged the city's monument strategy during the Visual Arts Committee meeting in July, arguing that the San Francisco Arts Commission also needed to address its mismanagement and inherent systemic racism in regards to the 2019 Maya Angelou Monument fiasco. But I was cut off before I finished my statement. Uproar ensued, with members of the public calling for me to be allowed to finish, but their requests were ignored. After the meeting, I worked with See Black Women Collective on a campaign to seek redress and restorative justice, and to end the prioritization of European conventions of statuary to represent Black women in the public realm. This campaign mobilized artists and activists to pressure the Arts Commission to suspend the reissued 2020 RFQ. Based on my earlier social media activism, the campaign provided specific actions and encouraged people to make public comments during the next full commission meeting. The Visual Arts Commission issued a public apology during that meeting. And after 2 hours of public comments from artists around the Bay Area and around the country, the commission voted to cease the new 2020 RFQ. The story was covered by the Times, which raised national awareness about the fiasco and was a catalyst for talks to have my monument erected in front of the library where it was originally selected for. I eventually met with Mayor Breed and Supervisor Stephanie, who both apologized. Thanks to the support and activism of the Bay Area arts community and artists around the country, Portrait of a Phenomenal Woman will finally be erected at the main library. That justice was served in this situation speaks to the enduring power of Dr. Angelou's remarkable legacy. Each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women. Thank you.
And thank you. I really appreciate that look into your practice over the past several years. And I was so excited by your pieces when they arrived here this summer. And then hearing you talk about them has made me wish that they could be here a little longer and I could explore them a little more in depth. But we have some time now for Ms. Thomas to answer questions. So if anyone would like to post anything in the Q&A, then I will be happy to facilitate that. While I'm kind of waiting for people to gather their thoughts or maybe post something, I think I'll start out with one. One thing that really struck me in your talk was the use of accessibility within media. So you talked about the accessibility of drawing, maybe versus painting, and the tambourine as a democratic instrument. And I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on that theme. Why is it important for you, for viewers, to kind of see something that maybe they could manipulate or do in a way that yeah,
it's really important for me in my practice to make my work accessible to a large audience, not just an art world audience. Especially today, art programs are being cut from public school curriculums. So I want to provide an experience that everyone who walks into a museum, everyone who walks into a gallery can relate to without having been initiated into the art world and the art world's particular language or particular aesthetics. I want to reach people beyond a specific audience and provide something, not only through the materials that I use, which I choose very intentionally, but also by using like beauty. Like beauty is very important, and we as humans respond to that. So I have specific strategies in order to reach the largest possible audience that I can. Also, some of my content is difficult. It's difficult. So the strategy of using relatable materials or accessible materials, and also creating objects or installations or drawings that are beautiful or show a certain level of craftsmanship, is a way to make the content a bit more palatable.
Thank you. And all I'm seeing in our chats and our Q&A is just tremendous thanks for your wonderful presentation. So if there are any other questions, certainly I will, I guess I'll continue to kind of build on it so we can keep our conversation open for a few more minutes. But, and you talked about wanting to reach the broadest possible audience and this idea of accessibility. And I think one thing, and you and I even touched on this as we prepared for this talk, in your slideshow, you showed your works of art on display in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And here we have it in West Virginia, which is certainly a more rural and less racially diverse, and certainly does not have the political progressiveness reputation that LA does. So what role do you think your art could play when it reaches communities for whom the personal connection might be a little bit more abstract, or that it might be a little bit more distant for some of our audience members here?
Well, I'm hoping that by virtue of the art itself, in the way that it looks and the way that it's presented and the way that it's crafted and the materials that I choose to use, that any audience would engage with it as an art object, first and foremost, as an art object. And that the content that is embedded within that object will hopefully reach a particular audience member or viewer, regardless of their background. Like, there's, in my view, I mean, that's really the power of art. It has the ability to reach anyone, no matter who you are. And so in my work, there's certainly levels of content that will resonate with differently with whomever is viewing it, and that's fine. It will certainly mean different things to different people.
Yeah, and I think, and I can say, as the educator who's worked on this exhibition, we had a tour last week with fifth graders who looked at a virtual tour, who looked at A Change Is Gonna Come, and they immediately they started making their own musical connections. So I think your use of tambourines and music, some of them reference Beyonce, or even, again, country music stars that you might not think would be associated with this content, but they were making their own personal connections about musicians who are maybe making political statements or statements about justice in their contemporary lives. So I wanted to share that with you and say that I think that effect is really taking hold amongst young people and our audiences here. So we do have a few audience questions now. Cindy, who's a friend of the Art Museum, wonders if your Maya Angelou work is the first you've done in bronze, and is that material a new challenge for you?
Yes. Yes, this is my first public art commission, and this will be the first time that I've worked with bronze. So learning to use a new material or work with a new material, or in this case, I'm going to be working with fabricators to realize my vision for this piece, is always exciting for me. It's super exciting. And the thought of breaking the bronze ceiling for me and my practice is also really exciting for me. So I'm at the very, very beginning stages now, because my monument design was just approved at the beginning of November. And it was a bit unexpected. I certainly could not have foreseen that the series of events leading up to this would yield this outcome, which is certainly welcome. So yes, new material, new scale, it's new, the first time for a lot of things. So I'm excited to take on the challenge.
And just kind of jumping in, I'm noticing that Pam Paulson from Paulson Fontaine Press joined us today, and she gave a wonderful talk too. I told several of the people who are signed on today are our museum docents, and I've been working with them on how best to describe the printmaking process to tours and audiences. And I think my work of 5 years in doing that was totally superseded by Pam's 30-minute talk that showed their way through the gallery. I think it was really eye-opening for a lot of folks. But I wonder, because the show, it showcases different media, like the tambourines and A Change Was Gonna Come. But I wonder if you could talk about a little bit of engaging in that printmaking process, which is also a different, and how you chose to make the prints that included in the show.
So when I worked with Paulson Press on that series of hair drawings, it was the first time that I'd ever created etchings. And one of the wonderful things about working with Paulson Press, they're master printers. They are master printers. So they walked me through the process of not drawing on paper, but actually etching into copper plate to create these really beautiful and very highly detailed etchings of hair. So again, it was the first time that I had worked with master printers, the first time that I created etchings. And the folks at Paulson, Pam, and just the folks there made the experience just really wonderful.
Yeah. And for those of you, since we don't have an image in the slideshow, for those of you, if you perhaps you haven't been to our gallery yet, as Lava was saying, she has a few prints in the exhibition as well that are these tremendously detailed. I can't imagine the etching process. That's part of the reason I wanted to ask this question. They're tremendously detailed, what she calls hair portraits. And you could see every single strand. It's really phenomenal. I don't think that I could do it justice even if I were in the gallery with a camera. So you better come down here and see it if you haven't yet. So thank you for that. So we have another question. Janet, who is actually a retired music professor here at the university, so she's interested in this musical connection and wants to know just a little bit more about how and when you decided to use tambourines. So you've talked a little bit about their meaning, but was there a moment that tambourines sort of struck you as what you wanted to do?
I first used the tambourine in an installation at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco in 2013. So I've been using the tambourine as an art object for 7 years now. I grew up in the Black church. My grandmother was the church pianist. My great-grandmother was the church organist, and my aunt was a choir director. So I grew up surrounded by gospel music. I sang in the church choir, and playing the tambourine for me as a child was one of my most favorite things to do. So I always knew that I would use these artifacts from my childhood and my own cultural history and history with music in my work. And I was given that opportunity when I exhibited. I had a solo show at the Museum of the African Diaspora, and they had a small gallery off of the main gallery. And when I walked in, I just envisioned this space filled with hanging tambourines. So it was, and it wasn't something that I planned either. It was walking into a space and then sort of imagining this in my mind's eye.
And it's really wonderful to see it come to fruition. And I think especially the mirrored ones where you can see yourself in it just has that really stirring effect as a viewer. So again, it's one of the downfalls of this COVID time. I feel like when I show that work of art, when I'm doing a Zoom tour, often they'll just see my tripod and iPad in the reflection of the, but even that is kind of a commentary on the times, right? that is what people would see. So I don't see anything further in the Q&A. I'm going to give another minute or so if anyone has something they want to jump in with. But while we wait for that, I just want to thank you for the tremendous preparation and thoughtfulness that you brought to this talk and just sharing your practice with us. I think it is an amazing body of work that is really powerful for us to experience here at the Art Museum of WVU. And for all of you out there, this, as I said, is our last program of 2020. We'll be on to 2021 and hopefully better days where we can see you in person at some point, but we will continue with virtual programming starting in January. So please look out for our website and social media so that you can see that. We will be opening new exhibitions in the latter part of January with new speakers and new things to look at and think about. So to all of you, I hope you have a very restful season and that we all start the new year off on a great foot. So thank you for joining us, and thank you so much, Lava. This was really a tremendous opportunity to get an insight into your work.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. All right. Take care, everyone.